Hello and welcome back. Alright, so in the previous video, I did a quick recap of where to go ahead and get all the software that we're going to be using, and I told you that we were going to go ahead and set up Blender and Unity to communicate properly before we started importing our objects into our scenes for our game. Okay, so what we're going to do first is, just to see what's going on, we're going to go ahead and open up Unity, and we're actually going to create a new project folder. Okay. Now, this window right here, you're not going to see it. This is because I went ahead and tested everything before I made this tutorial to make sure that it all worked properly. Okay, that's why you see game design and test game. Yeah, there's no game design folder here. Okay. Anyways, so you can choose where you want to save your game. Now, by default, Unity does have its own Unity projects folder. Okay, however, I'm not going to use it. I'm actually going to create a new folder in here. Title it Game Design. And come into here, create another folder, and label it as tutorial game. Okay, now that's all we need to do for Unity. So let's go ahead and, while our folder's selected, click on that, and then down here you'll have this huge list of different scripts and whatnot that you can use for your game. However, right now we're not going to be using any of these, so don't worry about that. And we're going to go ahead and click Create, and give it a second, and here's Unity. Alright, now also you may have gotten a little pop-up window right here that's showing you about different tutorials for getting used to Unity and whatnot. If you'd like to go ahead and follow those, by all means go for it. You know, the more information you have, the better you're going to be on. So I'm not going to say no. Now, also by default, your scene might look a little different than mine. So you'll see like a camera or something in here. It'll be very blank and boring. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and go to our y-axis, turn off the portrait, that way we can see our grid, and we're going to go ahead and click on Game Object, Create Other, and add a cube. Okay, so this is a default cube in Unity. And next we're going to go ahead and just center it into our view. And just for quick information's sake, the way that I'm moving around like this is by clicking, holding the middle mouse button, just like you would in Blender to rotate around your scene. Okay, so by default, Unity decides to use metric measurements, and this cube is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. Okay. So that's going to be very important for this, because we want to make sure that Blender imports our models into Unity and that we don't have to resize them later. So we're going to go ahead and minimize this. We're going to come over to Blender, and here's our default scene. So after you freshly installed Blender, this is what you're going to see. And we're going to go ahead and press in to pull up this little side panel here. And we're going to go ahead and minimize a couple things really quick. So we don't need item, we don't need 3D cursor, and we don't need the grease pencil. Okay, all we need is the transform panel and the view panel. Okay, and also at the present time, we're not going to be needing the timeline down here. So if you want to come over to where you see this little like 3-lined triangle over here, if you click and hold on that, you'll notice that it gets very dark, and you'll see this little arrow over here. Go ahead and release your mouse, and it'll hide the timeline. Okay, because for now we're not doing animation yet. And I also want to go ahead and bring this over a little bit, that way I can just see all of my menu options. Okay. And now, the last thing before we go ahead and start playing with measurements is, since in Blender we're primarily going to be using it for modeling and then animating later, we don't need the camera and we don't need the lamp. All we need is our default cube. Okay. So now back over here into the side panel, we're going to be focusing on measurements. And if you notice, our Dimensions tab says this is a 2 by 2 by 2 unit. Okay, well, theoretically, a 2 by 2 unit should be bigger than this cube over here in Unity, right? Well, let's find out. So we're going to come back to Blender, and we're going to just export this cube, and we're going to use the FBX file format, so Autodesk FBX. And the reason why we're doing that is because FBX is one of the file formats that is native to Unity, which will make it very easy for transitioning from Blender over to Unity for our development. And we're going to go ahead and navigate to where we created our game folder. And once you go into the main one, which mine is tutorial game, you'll notice that before it was empty, and now we have these 4 folders. Okay. Now the one that we want right now is assets, because this is where we're going to be saving our models. And I'm going to create a new directory and simply title it models, if I can spell correctly. So go into models, and then I'm going to title you cube.fbx and hit export. Okay. So now we're going to come back over to Unity, and you'll notice that down on our project panel, before it was empty, now we actually have a models folder under our assets folder. And that is one thing that Unity is very good about doing, is it's very good about maintaining the best performance that it can and keeping track of your files in real time. Okay, so let's go ahead and take our cube, and we're going to switch down to wireframe mode so we can see inside of it for this tutorial right here. And we're going to open up our models folder, and we're going to just drag our cube out. And then so we can see the difference in size, we're going to change its position and put it back onto the very center point in our grid. And remember, this is our default cube from Unity. And if we zoom in by scrolling up on our mouse wheel, we will see this tiny little cube right here. That's the one that we just imported from Blender. And that's what we do not want to see when importing our models. We don't want our models to be very small or very big. We want them to be the exact size that we made them before. So we're going to go ahead and just delete the cube that we added. And we're going to switch back over to Blender. And now we're going to go ahead and size everything up so that it works properly, and it will do this every time. So first, we're going to go ahead and come over to our Properties panel and click on Scene, which has this little circle, cylinder, and a light. And you'll notice that under our units measurement, we have none, metric, and imperial, and degrees and radians. Let's go ahead and leave degrees as the preferred option. And then for this, you can use either metric or imperial. And I am from the United States, so naturally imperial would be more suited to me for math purposes. However, we're just doing simple math here, and it's really just meters by meters that Unity uses. So I'm going to go ahead and use metric just to save time, since it's really just 1 plus 1 is all that we're going to be using. There's not going to be a whole lot of division or multiplication. So make sure you're on metric, and then you'll notice over here that our Blender units switched from 2.0 to 2M. So it went from 2 Blender units to 2 meter by 2 meter by 2 meter. Okay, so is it big enough yet for Unity? Unfortunately, no. And you might be asking, how can it not be bigger than the 1 meter in Unity if it says 2 meters? Well, the reason why is the scale factor is still off in comparison to Unity. So over here, under units, we see scale at 1. So 1 full set, and theoretically it should work. However, I've played around with it, there's no way around it. You have to go ahead and set this down to 0.01. And you'll notice that in our view, the scene just got really small, and that now we're starting to have a hard time seeing our grid. Okay, so that's another thing that we're going to fix here in a minute. But back over in dimensions, it's not 2 meters anymore, it's actually 2 centimeters. That's because we dropped it all the way down to 0.01. So let's go ahead and set this back to 1 by 1 by 1. And you don't have to actually press 1 and then M. All you gotta do is hit 1 on enter, and it'll actually automatically assume that you're talking about meters since we're under metric. And that's exactly what we want. Okay. So now, our cube's the same size, but we're still having this issue with our view. So if we come down to clip, and you'll see it says 1 millimeter up to 10 meters. Let's just change that to 100. And now our view is back to normal. Okay. And the last thing you'll notice is before, under scale, it used to say 1 across all three, and now it says 50. That's actually what we want. That way, when we import our objects into Unity, it's the exact same size ratio. So let's go ahead and export again. So FBX, and I'm just going to overwrite the cube that we used before. And you'll notice that we get this error popping up saying that the cube's scale is 50 by 50 by 50, and that armature deformation will not work as expected, blah blah blah. And it's asking us to go ahead and scale it back down so that armatures will work properly. Well, at the present time, we're just making models. We are not getting into animation yet, so we don't need to worry about this at the present time, so just ignore that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and minimize Blender, come back to Unity, and everything will look the same as it did before, but this cube is actually the new cube that we just created in Blender that has the new scaling. So let's go ahead and drag it out, and you'll notice that it's already showing that it's the same size. Now, if my computer's willing to cooperate with me, which for some reason it didn't the last time I did this, and it is. Okay, so last time for some reason I would go ahead and put the position all the way back down to 0, and it was still off kilter for some reason. I don't know why. My computer's acting funny, but it seems to be happy now. So if I go ahead and hold down the control button and then just drag the x-axis over, you'll notice that our cube matches the same size as the Unity cube. And that's exactly what we want. So coming over to textured, scrolling back on the mouse wheel, then right-clicking and holding, we now have a Blender cube, a Unity cube and a Blender cube. Now, as you can see, ours looks a little different, but that's because ours actually has some materials, because by default, Blender does give you a gray diffuse material. So for now, don't worry about that. We're just going to go ahead and leave it as is at the present time. And that is the way that we're going to have Blender set up. However, before we can continue into the next video, we need to come back over to Blender and make sure that all the settings that we just did are going to be standard. That way, whenever we're making something new, we don't have to do all of this scaling every time. So I'm going to go ahead and just adjust it a little bit here, zoom out a bit, press N to hide this panel over here, and then I want to, by preference, I like to see my render settings. So you can choose however you want it to look. And then before we go ahead and save the preferences, we're going to come to user preferences, and we want to make sure that everything is selected, enabled. Okay, so first one is, even though it already is enabled, we're going to come over to import and export, and we want to make sure that the Autodesk FBX format is checked, because that's going to be the important one. And then the rest of these are primarily just optional, but let's see here, is there anything else that I need in here? At the present time, no, so let's go ahead and come over to input. And now, really quick, if you're working on a laptop and your laptop doesn't happen to have its own number pad and you only have the numbers that are above the keyboard, then you're going to want to click on, let's see, where is it? Emulate Numpad, and what that will do is it will it'll think that your laptop keyboard, it'll think that the numbers 1 through 0 above your letters are the same thing as an actual number pad on the far right side of a standard keyboard. That way you can switch between views much easier. And if you're on a desktop, don't worry about it. And then if you're also on a laptop and you don't have a external wireless mouse or something like that, you also want to check and emulate 3-button mouse, and that'll make Blender think that your touchpad is a standard mouse that you would find on a desktop. Okay, other than that, depending on your preferences, I like to have turntable selected, but some people might like trackball, and what that is turntable. Back in Blender, when you're navigating and rotating around an object, the way that it does that is the difference. So like this is a turntable, and trackball will kind of like rotate your 3D space as you're going around, and then you'll be sitting there with a really weird angle. But it's entirely up to you as far as which preferences you like. Okay, so other than that, we really don't need to change anything else. So let's go ahead and click on Save User Settings, and close out of this window, and we're going to go ahead and come up to File, and click on Save Startup File. And the reason why we're doing that is because now, provided that my computer's happy, if I open up Blender again, by default, it should, and it did, it saved my user preferences, so I no longer have a timeline down here for animation. My toolbar was pulled out from its original state. Turntable still works, and then if we press N to open up our side panel, we'll see that the scale is still at 50, we're still seeing it as 1 meter, and our view is still at 1 millimeter to 100 meters, and then finally scene is still in metric. Okay, and that's what we want, because now Blender is set up properly to import our objects and models into Unity without us having to scale our stuff up and down over in Unity anymore. So from now on, all we're going to have to do is say we've got a fancy scene here that we want to use for a level in our game. We go up to File, we go ahead and save it, then we come back to File, go down to Export, hit Autodesk FBX, that way Unity's happy with it. Then we just got to go over to Unity, and everything's good. Okay, so other than that, from now on, we're going to start getting into the technical aspects of game design, whether it's understanding polygon counts, different modeling methods, and we're going to import our stuff over to Unity, we're going to set up a level or two, we're going to start testing it, and from there, we're going to go on and we're going to make a full, complete game. So, I apologize if I made you a little bored, but from now on, things are going to get much more interesting, and overall we're just going to have some more fun. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.